You're listening to the Forging Bio podcast, a show that illuminates invention, not in some distant laboratory, but in the very fabric of our everyday lives. We're sitting down with innovators in biotechnology and biomanufacturing to talk about how microbes and molecules are making the future of industry. We'll hear incredible stories of inspiration, revolutionary ideas, and approaches to creating ingredients for food, beverage, nutrition, pharmaceuticals, beauty, agriculture, materials, and more, all shaping the future of health, wellness, and prosperity. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Lippmeier, Senior Vice President of Innovation at Conagen. Today, we have the privilege of hosting Daphne Preuss, PhD and CEO. Also with her is Frank Turano, PhD and Chief Research Officer at Natáur. Today, they join us to help us dive into the world of bio-based taurine, an essential nutrient for humans and animals. It's used in everyday products, infant formula, pet food, animal feed, nutrition supplements, personal care products, and perhaps most famously in energy drinks as well. Could you both start by giving our listeners a glimpse into your background and how your journey led to your mission to bring sustainable and eco-friendly taurine to the market?
I'm going to ask my colleague Frank to kick that off.
My initial interest in using microbes was in bioremediation. Being from New Jersey, I had an interest of using microbes to digest hazardous waste. So as I went into school, I started learning to use the tools of molecular biology to produce amino acids, mainly in plants. And that interest then brought me to the use of amino acids, which normally we think of amino acids as building blocks for proteins. These proteins are used in the cells. I think of them as 2x4s, as structural entities, or as little engines or enzymes that can produce different molecules. And if you put these in a series, you can produce essentially a conveyor belt to make new molecules. So I became interested in that process, mainly in plants. And then that segued into the use of microbes. Most amino acids that are produced today are actually made through fermentation.
Yeah, and that has parallels actually to the history of Conagen as well. I think you guys, we've had conversations in the past, since you probably already know that we actually had our start at the Danforth Plant Science Center, and then Conagen eventually evolved away from plants to work more with microbes and the biochemical pathways to make molecules that you just so ably explained. But let me ask, well, actually, before I get into asking more about taurine, Daphne, maybe you could also give us a little bit of your background and how you came to be interested in taurine.
Absolutely. And you can see the deep knowledge that Frank has in this space. And that was one of the things that attracted me to work with him. I've spent most of my career focused on genes and genetics and how we can harness those to improve food, improve agriculture. And so I was really excited when I heard that Frank had figured out how to manufacture amino acids in a microbe in a safer way than using petroleum, like a lot of the processes were prior to that. And so we formed this little company about 3 years ago to take this challenge on, and it's been a really exciting journey.
That's great. So why taurine?
It's one of the major molecules that we need for nutrition, for support. It's got a lot of applications, shampoos, detergents, animal feed, all kinds of things. So it's a huge market. But the way it's made today is, really harmful to the environment. It's mainly synthesized from fossil fuels. In doing that, there's a toxic process that generates carcinogens. It generates a huge amount of greenhouse gas in that process. And then, what is a fairly dirty process then makes an ingredient that ends up in everything from personal care products to infant formula. So we really wanted to clean that up. And it was pretty clear that what Frank and his team had developed was a good way to do that.
Right. Yeah, a biological way. I think our listeners are probably pretty used to the theme now about how biotechnology and precision fermentation can be used to make things more sustainable. But there's always this open question about how sustainable. So to be clear, taurine, the stuff that we might already have in an energy drink, is made by petrochemistry. Yes.
Right. Yes.
Yep.
95% of it. The other 5% is made by rendering animal carcasses.
Oh, okay. So also not extremely sustainable. Maybe a little bit more,
popular.
but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah. And one of the big themes of some of the other molecules that we've talked about in this podcast is, around how the molecule itself might actually be a little bit different. But in the case of taurine, the taurine that we can make biologically by partnering together is basically the same structure as it is, even down to the stereo level, which I've explained on prior podcasts. But I'll gloss over that now. So it's the same molecule is the point. I mean, you're not getting anything different. You're just getting more sustainability from it and less pollutants and things like that.
That's right. It's cleaner. We've purchased off the market the petrochemical made taurine and compared it to ours. The old way gives you a lot of heavy metal contamination, gives you carcinogen contamination. And we've shown that our taurine is purer than the most pure standard you can purchase today. So it's really, really clean. That makes it a lot more attractive. And then, I think we've talked about this, Casey, other things that are attractive beyond just, the environmental aspects, the health aspects, is the supply chain by switching to fermentation is a lot more manageable, a lot more secure.
Right. Yeah. I'll touch back on that supply chain question because that's, the whole world is obviously much more interested in supply chains ever since the pandemic, and we've understood better about how those can be disrupted and how it's important to get those diversified. But yeah, let me touch back on that for a second a little bit later. So Frank, I wanted to get back to you and just ask you a question about some of the advantages, again, of making something by biology as opposed to petrochemistry. I know that it's not possible to make things obviously perfectly 100% pure. And when you're making ingredients, there's always, that little 0.1%, 1% of other stuff that comes along for the ride that it's not economical to get rid of it. So how, Daphne just explained how you get some, heavy metal catalysts and perhaps other things from the petrochemical process. What's that 1% in a bio-derived product?
In our process, I would even say it's lower than it's extremely low, 0.1% where we are now. And we've gotten comments back from potential customers that have run the material, and they're very excited about how clean it is. So I can't address exactly what else is in it. We haven't run those analysis at this point, but we suspect that it's going to be much cleaner than anything that's out there in the market. What we're feeding the microbes are essentially minerals and sugar. And, the output, these microbes produce high levels of taurine. They release it into the broth. And after simply removing the cells, the downstream purification process is very straightforward. So we're able to get a very clean product at the end.
I imagine it would be similar to the kind of components you might find in other fermented food products like beer or pickle juice or things like that. Of course, it's not going to be nearly as salty or as alcoholic as those kinds of things because it's highly purified. But at a trace level anyway, I imagine you'd find similar kind of components. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's touch back on to the supply chain issue. So, Daphne, maybe you could tell me a little bit more about what the supply chain looks like for the petrochemical and how Conagen and Natáur is looking to change that and maybe make it better.
Today, it's a very consolidated supply chain. It is based in factory output in China. There's only a handful of major factories that are producing this molecule. And the supply has been not always steady. Sometimes there's excess in the market, sometimes there's deficiencies. And because of that, that creates a lot of price volatility. So the users of taurine often have challenges with forward contracting or assurance of having enough volume. So by switching that process to a microbial-based fermentation, factories that use microbes are often smaller. You don't need to be next to a refinery, and you can distribute this in a lot of different countries. And so that just on its own is giving a lot of the end users comfort that they'll have optionality in supply as opposed to relying on just one major location or one major supplier.
Right. And I know that some countries have particularly strict controls on, the kind of emissions and things that can, I know like in Europe, for instance, since we have a factory there, that there are certain processes that you just can't do because they don't, meet the specific standards of that country. So that's really interesting.
Right. Yeah. And the intermediates in the current taurine process are hazardous. And so depending on the region where you would set up a petrochemical based taurine synthesis, you're going to have compliance issues, expense related to compliance, disposable of waste, things like that.
Well, and I'm sure it'd be more attractive to the local communities too to know that the petrochemical factory that is next door is switching over to perhaps to a fermentation factory. I mean, I think just in general that sounds better. I'd rather live next to such a factory. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. So, is there a connection to pricing on this? These gigantic factories, the reason, as I understand, why they make them from petrochemicals is because there's a cost advantage for doing so. And so I know that between the both of us, that's a major concern for how we're trying to make it. But, is that something that we feel that we can meet together?
Absolutely. I think just kind of looking at this broader space of precision fermentation, obviously lots of target molecules that various companies are chasing. And one of the big barriers to entry into the market is the question of whether you can price it competitively with the petrochemical synthesis version. So from the beginning, from the outset, that's been one of the things that Frank and his team have taken on. And, I would say to his credit, I've seen many scientists just do science because it's interesting for science sake, but Frank has always had this commercial component where he knew the price point had to get to be competitive with the market or the product would never make it. And so that laser focus on driving down costs and driving up taurine yields and titers has been there from the outset. We know we can price competitive with today's taurine in the market. So we're quite excited about that.
It does require some big scales, but yeah, I'm confident we're going to get there as well too.
Yeah.
Moving back over to you, Frank. I know it was a decision for both of you, so feel free to also answer, Daphne. But I'm looking for you to flatter me a little bit. What led you to pick Conagen as your partner for taurine?
We actually met via video on a conference, and I was impressed with your background. I just have to tell a little side story here. So where we are now, we're physically located in the same laboratory where your former company actually made omega-3. So we're actually in the same lab, and I think it's a little ironic that another highly valued molecule is going to come from the same exact space. So, and then doing our homework and looking at your company's track record, and after meeting you and seeing your excitement on the project, it looked like it was a good fit.
Thanks for invoking my history. Sorry, Daphne, I just had to go in and respond to that very quickly. So just to explain for our listeners some of the backstory there, to expand upon it. My first professional experience out of graduate school was a great company called Martech Biosciences. It was later acquired by DSM, their nutritional products division. But yeah, Martech was pretty revolutionary in that they were the first ones to change infant formula in decades by the addition of an omega-3 fat. And I also think that harmony, that resonance, if you will, that echo of that experience in Natáur and the fact that they're in that same initial lab from Martech is really cool. So anyway, yeah, with that said, sorry, Daphne, feel free.
Oh, no, I was just going to add on to what Frank said. You two started the interaction, and then I called people in the industry, and I heard just incredibly strong compliments about working with your company, and all the experience we've had since we agreed to work together has been very positive. So I'm really excited. And I just had one other thing. I think a lot of startups have great technology ideas, but they struggle getting to scale and getting to market. And I think one of the best things we did was partner up so that we have no problem telling people we can make taurine at the scale that our customers need.
Yeah, thanks for acknowledging that. I mean, that's something that we're quite proud of as well, too, is our, differentiator on the fact that even though we do offer up a lot of our resources under a CRO model, we're also a CDMO, and, we can be a manufacturing partner as well at scale. So that's great. Thanks for mentioning it. I appreciate it. It's been a great pleasure working with you guys as well, too. So going back to you, Frank, I just maybe this is my report card here, right? I'd like to hear a little bit more about just how the day-to-day interaction with our company works for you. I mean, just the cadence of it, the rhythm of it, the technical meetings, et cetera. Just if you could expand on that a little bit. What does it look like?
No, it looks good. So I meet with the technical team at Conagen weekly. I meet with the bioengineering lead as well as the chemical engineering lead. So we're constantly in communication, talking about, number one, how do we really work to make sure we're producing the most effective microbes to produce these molecules, and then working through the process on our side to get the fermentation up and going, but then handing those microbes over to your group, and your group has increased the production even more than what we had here. So that was a pleasant surprise, and we're working together weekly. In fact, we just met yesterday, and we have a plan to move to production. So we're pretty excited on our side.
Yeah, as are we. And then, I think any successful collaboration is always looking for that synergy, to recognize that synergy, and as we have. So that's been great. I kind of want to give you guys an opportunity. This is not something that I normally do on a lot of podcasts. As the host, as the interviewer, I don't normally do this. But if you guys want to ask me any questions, I'd be happy to do that. Give you the opportunity before we wrap up.
I'll try one that's kind of a follow-on to what was just being said. I think sometimes people who are not in the thick of this kind of science, it might appear that scientists sit back, make a plan on paper, and it just naturally works. But this is so much an empirical, iterative process where we build something, we test it, we build something, and we test it. Casey, I think that, what's been very beneficial to us is we're leveraging years and years and years of Conagen experimental effort, and capabilities. You guys have been down the blind alleys, what doesn't work. We don't have to do that again. And so maybe I would love to hear a little bit more about how you see that iterative process really work to the benefit of making these molecules at the right scale and at the right cost.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. It's at the end of the day, one of the first things that I always think about to answer that question is just our platforms, which I've spoken about on other podcasts and in previous episodes. But we have an amino acids platform as well too. I've spoken before about our terpene platform and about our phenolic platform. Again, these are all very technical, scientific terms, but it all boils down to the fact that we've already done a lot of the work. Whenever a customer is going to come to us, or a partner like Natáur with a specific idea, there's a very good chance we've already gone down halfway down the road that needs to be traveled. We already had some good chassis strains in place with a lot of good tools for those organisms to be engineered in such a way that we just had a head start. And so that was one thing. But then, as I mentioned before as well, too, our differentiator about being able to actually scale this stuff up and manufacture it, I think, is key. And even if a customer doesn't necessarily want to work with us as a manufacturing partner, that's okay. We can still create a very good tech transfer package of the scaled process that they could then bring to anyone if they really want to. Not everything is a perfect fit around the manufacturing side, but, if you're talking about a nutritional ingredient or a food ingredient or a flavor and fragrance, or a number of other kind of products that are adjacent to that, then we're a good partner. We do have some more time, so one thing that I as I was talking, I realized I didn't give enough treatment on, I think, is just the uses of taurine. Again, most people, me included, really think of taurine as being a sports energy drink ingredient. You at the very beginning, Daphne, had mentioned, touched on some of the other applications, though. I mean, how big and how broad is this market really? Like, is taurine just everywhere?
So this is an area of science that is still emerging. It's an amazingly abundant molecule in our own bodies. We need a lot of it. It's essential. It's essential for heart development, muscle development, brain development. So it's in infant formulas because infants absolutely need it. Interestingly, we get it primarily from our diet, and it's present in products that come from animals. So if you eat meat and if you consume a lot of dairy, you probably have a good chance of getting enough taurine in your diet. But if you're shifting to a plant-based diet, it's highly likely that you're deficient, which is why now it's being recommended that people take taurine supplements daily and really make sure that they have enough. It's been found that it's really important in aging, and healthy aging probably depends on having enough taurine. So this is a little plug, even though most of the taurine out there is coming from petrochemicals, people still should be taking taurine, and hopefully we'll replace that with a biological source soon. But it's pretty profound what the molecule can do. There's a lot of scientific studies coming out almost monthly. And then another big use that folks are seeing now is using it as a surfactant. Surfactants are detergents. They have an oily end and a charged end, and you see them in all of your shampoos and your soaps. Taurine can do the same thing, but it's not nearly as caustic. And so it's better for the skin, it's better for the environment. So there is a big and growing demand for taurine for those kind of uses as well.
Right. Even though we together are laser focused on taurine, understanding that it's a sulfur-containing molecule, which is, of course, one of the critical components of nutrition, just sulfur in general. Does that lead us to perhaps consider other sulfur molecules that we might be able to make?
You're touching on our bigger story, which is also a whole platform. What Frank figured out is how to make a class of molecules that have been hard to make by fermentation. And those are the molecules that contain sulfur. Sulfur is about 1/5 of the key nutrients in your body. It's needed in proteins. It's needed in a lot of small molecules, and a huge number of pharmaceuticals, antimicrobials, fertilizers. They all incorporate sulfur, and the lion's share of those are coming from petrochemicals. So as we've gotten our arms around taurine, we've started to look at the long list of what is the next one after this, and there are some really interesting pharmaceutical targets, some really interesting antioxidant targets. So I'd say stay tuned. We're not telling you yet what they are, but we are starting to leverage what we've already built and just tweak it a bit to make these other molecules.
Well, as you know, we're eager to work with you guys on anything else that might come down the pipe. So that's exciting. Yeah, I mean, taurine is pretty cool. The more I've learned about it, the more excited I've gotten about the molecule. I like the longevity story, obviously. You're probably aware, again, that we have other molecules in the Conagen portfolio that tie into that longevity story. Ergothioneine in particular is a big seller of ours. So perhaps we'll have another episode all about ergothioneine maybe sometime in the future. But so Daphne, just another question about all this. Obviously, at the end of the day, there's a lot of cool technology and scale up and manufacturing, but we have to sell the stuff, right? We have to get a market for it. And so maybe you could just tell me a little bit about what the challenges are that Natáur faces in promoting bio-based taurine, and actually what your future plans are for getting this out in the market.
We're super close, actually, to that point. And what's been interesting is, as companies have heard that we're working on this, we have had incoming traffic from the largest global consumer products companies, ingredients companies. And the question we're being asked is, when can I get some? When are you ready? How much can you give me? I love that, that's really been exciting. And so then I turn to Frank and say, where are we at? How are we doing? Do we have the yields at the level where we can hit the price point? And so very recently we've crossed that bridge. We feel very confident that we've got the microbes working at a level we need. And so the next step, and this, Casey, is getting a proof of concept run that's large enough at your facilities that it convinces us all to go big. You don't want to go big without a smaller pilot to make sure that you don't waste a lot of resources. But getting that pilot done, which we're eminently there, we really believe then 90 days after that, we're selling. We are selling, and then it's going to be your problem to make space and have enough capacity to start filling these orders.
And of course, there are regulatory considerations that we have to put in place, but we've already got all the manufacturing permits and the strain import permits. But for the food markets, of course, we have to make sure that the product is safe. But again, there's such a history of use behind taurine. I don't really see any issue with that.
And we can probably, as I was saying before, there's some chemical manufacturing that has a less sensitivity on the regulatory side. So those might be some of our first movers, and then moving into animal feeds or various other uses that are relying on some of our food safety. I think the most sensitive of all areas will be infant formula, and it should be.
Thank you again, Frank. Thank you, Daphne. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed our time, as always, when I talk to you guys. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more, please visit our website at forgingbio.com, where you can listen to every episode and connect with our guests. Together, we're forging the future of biotechnology.